Welcome to the Bill Cartwright Show with our special guest, basketball enthusiast, Bill Reilly. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bill. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor, actually.
Hey, let's do this quickly because I want everybody to get to know you very, very quickly. Let's talk about where you grew up, and I want you to talk a little bit about your mom and dad.
Oh, sure. I grew up on Long Island, Nassau County, suburb of New York. My dad commuted to Manhattan for pretty much his entire adult life. My mom was a homemaker, but since obviously we're going to talk a little basketball, one of the things you should know is she's the one that taught me basketball. She actually played on a semi-pro women's team in the early 1930s.
Wow.
When she was in her early 20s.
Do you remember the name of that team?
Well, it was an industrial league. She was on the Metropolitan Life Insurance team, and she had a job. She was high school educated. She had a clerk. I mean, in those days, clerical jobs. There were millions of clerical jobs because we didn't have computers doing all this wasted work. So pushing paper around for a life insurance company was a major activity. So she had a job there, but she got free time to go. The team went and barnstormed up and down the East Coast. One of her, we all talk about who our proudest moments on the court. She played against Babe Dietrichson back in the day, and remembered that for entire life. Now, of course, when I came along, and I only knew her as a wonderful mom who was obese, way overweight, and long past her any kind of being in shape. But we do have pictures of her when she was in her 20s, and she was quite a hot number, and had a lot of fun. A lot of fun with the game. That was a very positive time in her life. So I don't think one generation is enough time to have a genetic imprint, but certainly the cultural imprint was very strong for me. And then when I was I think 14, and between my freshman and sophomore year in high school, I grew 6 inches. I don't know if you had that experience. I mean, I know what growing pains felt like. I mean, basically, you'd wake up in the middle of the night and your feet would hurt. But that was so suddenly I became attractive. I was kind of bouncing around. At that point, I didn't have a focus on I had normal young man's interest in athletics, but I didn't have a focus anywhere. And suddenly I was at 14, I was 6'4", I think. I ended up being 6'7", and played some serious basketball for my high school team.
Can you talk about that? So when you were in high school, you were a sports kid. Were you? What were you thinking back then?
As near as I can remember, mostly thinking about girls and not much else. I was a good student. I was, that was a requirement from my folks. Report card time was you didn't want to be there if you had B's and C's on your report card. So I had good report cards. I was a good student, a little bit rebellious at times. But we got to when I finally got to junior varsity basketball as a sophomore, I mean, I felt like I was more at home than anywhere else, and I very quickly started to I basically concentrated on that from that point forward. In the springtime, you'd run track just to keep in shape. In the fall, you'd start out with the cross country teams for the same reason. It was still painful those first 2 weeks of up and down the court when the basketball team came together. and had to get in basketball shape, and you put some spring back in your legs. It was, I'll never forget that pain.
What was the name of your high school?
It's called Syosset High School. I'm one of those guys who was very disappointed by some of the trends today. I played in high school. Syosset was named after a local Indian tribe, the town itself. So I played for the Syosset Braves. When I went to college, I went to Dartmouth and played for the Dartmouth Indians. Neither of those teams have a mascot any longer, and I find that ridiculous and very disappointing.
Let's talk about that. So when you left high school, you ended up going to Dartmouth. How and why did you go to Dartmouth?
Well, the real reason is I was interested in the Ivy League because my grades were such that, I was being pointed in that direction by my teachers and a little bit by my parents. My parents didn't go to college, so they really didn't have they weren't much help about, figuring out the rules of the road and the landscape. But my teachers were much more help, and they pointed me to Ivy League colleges. I was very strong in the sciences, and so I had an interest in engineering. Dartmouth had a very unique, still has one of the most unique and I think productive engineering curriculums in the country. And that got my attention. But the real story is, since I was playing basketball, I had an local alum who pushed me along and sponsored me on a trip to the campus. I flew up to Hanover, which was in those days would have been a 5-hour drive from Long Island, but somebody blew for some kind of DC-3 plane ticket for me, and I went up and I showed up. In those days, you could work out with the team a little bit over the weekend. In those days, there were Saturday classes. I went to some classes on Saturday and was, getting tours of the campus and meeting people, and had a very good impression. But then Sunday, when I was supposed to fly home, there's a blizzard. It's northern New Hampshire. It happens all the time. And so I got snowed in for 3 days. The guy who was a freshman basketball player and who'd been shepherded me around campus, the guy by the name of Bob Page, ended up with me until Wednesday, I think it was. I ended up sleeping on the couch in his dorm room and going to classes with him. And basically, for a seventh time, at the time I was only 16 years old. That was fairly early in my senior year. And I was just sold. I don't know if you've ever been there, but Dwight Eisenhower said when he first saw the Dartmouth campus, he said, "This is the way I've always thought a college should look. The place is drop dead beautiful, always has been. It's 250 years. It's got a 250-year existence and a long tradition, and all these things resonated with me. And so, I was accepted, and that's where I ended up. By the way, Bob Page lives about 10 blocks from USF and is a season ticket holder still at USF. He's one of my oldest and dearest friends, and we tell that story together quite often.
So talk about your first year at Dartmouth. Talk about some of the things you learned, and talk about some of the things that you really liked and some of the things that maybe you didn't like.
Well, I was as an engineering student, you're really thrown into you don't do any engineering at all until the second year. Your first year, even though you get all sorts of advanced placement, they throw you into these really nasty math and physics classes and things like that. It was the workload for me was at least twice and maybe more what I'd experienced in high school. Because in high school, I mean, I didn't have to kill myself to get mostly A's, B's, and A's. But at Dartmouth, it turned out to be quite a challenge. In those days, everybody was graded on a curve, which meant every year, we had 800 men show up each freshman, for freshman year, each year, 800 new men. And you knew that 10 to 15 of them were going to be asked to leave at the end of the year because they couldn't cut it. And so you didn't want to be in that group for sure. So there was competition in the grade side. I was fortunate in that I had an aptitude for the sciences and math, and I probably had it easier. A lot of people dropped out. When I say a lot of people, the engineering program attracted between 2 and 3 many times as many people to show up at Dartmouth as a number that stuck with it. More than half of the guys that I met in that first year in all the ancillary classes ended up departing for what we used to call gut majors, economics and geography and kind of fun things like that. English majors, history majors. Well, I still make fun of them all.
Did you have any professors who really kind of guided you along the way, or a mentored you along the way?
Oh, absolutely. There were a number of them that I can't really explain this. It seemed to me that I was often getting special friends type treatment, not in grading or anything like that, but in terms of after class and later on at social interactions when you're an upperclassman, you come into contact with the professors often on some kind of minor social activity, whether it's at a fraternity house or some club or some school function. And I was always kind of surprised at the level of interest that guys who seemed a lot older than I was and who I respected a great deal seemed to take in me. I still look back on it with some wonder. I don't know. They apparently saw something in me that they liked, and I'm not sure I know what it is even today.
Mm-hmm.
But I am certainly thankful for it because I believe it helped me a great deal to be comfortable and to enjoy, the cold Northeast.
When I was at USF, I really learned about the world, and I learned that I was really only bounded by my thoughts. What did you really learn at Dartmouth?
Well, I learned to a large extent what you come away with is a confidence that if you don't know the answer to something, you know how to find it out. And that is these days turning out to be somewhat of a unique skill, which I find very troubling. These days, remember there was no internet, there was no Googling anything. If you had an assignment, you had to go to the library and work your way through the stacks to find relevant things that you had that you could read. You couldn't read like War and Peace to come up with tomorrow's assignment. You had to be very judicious in what you chose to read, and there's a whole process there. That as an engineer, I've always been inquisitive. How do things work? And I look at society the same way. How does society work? What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? And all of these things I see at least a dotted line back to my time in college when the search for truth, when the search for understanding was front and center of your entire life. So,
Well, talk about, you're about to leave Dartmouth. Talk about, what are you thinking? First job. Do you know what you want to do?
this was after Dartmouth. I'm sorry.
You're about to leave. You're about to leave school. So what are
Okay.
you thinking?
I ended up with a fairly easy decision, Bill. I interviewed, I graduated my engineering degree. It was a good year to be a college graduate. The recruiters were all over campus. I ended up with, I don't know, 4 or 5 decent job offers from major corporations around the country. But one of my close friends who graduated the year before, he was actually president of my fraternity, had graduated from Dartmouth and gone down to Harvard Business School. And he said, Riles, you ought to go to business school. I mean, it's just as simple as that. It was, when I think back about it, it was impossible. I didn't, I was married. I had my first child, 3/4 of the way through my senior year in college. I was living in a old Army Quonset hut that was the married students' housing, about 3 miles outside of campus. I'm driving my pride and joy 1948 DeSoto convertible, bouncing around all over New England in it.
Wow,
I mean, the car was it was 25 years old when I bought it for $50. I still own it, by the way.
Awesome.
But anyway, it was impossible. I had no money. My dad, I mean, he paid for the bulk of my college. I worked and took out some loans in college, but basically my dad paid for the bulk of it. And but I never even asked him to pay for graduate school. That wasn't in the cards. That wasn't part of the contract, the unspoken contract we had. He was very proud that I got to Dartmouth. I was the first in my family to go to a 4-year college, and he was very proud of that. And but I mean, it would have been hugely difficult for him to pay for another 2 years. I had a younger brother who was also using tuition money at that time. Anyway, I did get accepted to Harvard, and the reason I went was just, it was my first business decision, Bill. My all of the jobs that I looked at as an engineer started at, they were all bunched between $8,000 and $8,500 a year, just that straightforward. That year, Harvard Business School graduates were making $11,500, coming right fresh out of school, and that number had gone up $1,000 each of the previous 3 years. It basically was on an unsustainable curve, but it was heading in the right direction. I said, if I'm lucky, it'll hang in there for another 2 years, and I'll end up coming out of Harvard making $13,500. And there's no way in the world, if I start with a company at $8,500, that in 2 years I'm going to be making that much money. So can I afford to make the investment to get to that point? That the end of the story is I managed to do it. The folks at Harvard were pretty good. They loaned me some money in the first year. They said, Reilly, you're running out of borrowing capacity, and we tell you right today before you start that we're not going to lend you enough money to do the second year. There are a very small number of second year fellowships available. So if you bust a gut and get one of those, you can come back for the second year. Otherwise, you have to work somewhere and come back when you got some dough. Well, I got one of those fellowships, I put my nose to the grindstone and got better grades than I ever got at Dartmouth. And it was required. And I got through and I came out with what today is a silly small student loan, but in those days, of course, it was a pretty good chunk of the first year's salary, and that was the standard, and paid it off finally, but not without the usual, not quite as much pain as these kids seem to have today, but the usual amount of difficulty. So that was my first business decision. It worked. I graduated. Sure enough, the starting offer was 13.5, and here I am.
So talk about your first job.
Well, I scored one of the plum jobs in part because of my academic record at Harvard, but also a large part of because of my overall background. I joined Citibank's brand new venture capital firm. It was actually a subsidiary, Citicorp Venture Capital. And they had started up by just collecting some bankers from some of the corporate platforms, people that knew a little bit more about the national markets and the financial markets than your average college graduate. And a lot of these guys had business school degrees, but they didn't know engineering. And of course, all the early money going into venture capital was Silicon Valley and up on Route 128 in Boston. It was all computers and technical stuff. And the history majors were lost. They're still great friends, but they were lost. They were absolutely lost. And so I got that job. I did it for four years working in Manhattan. Got the family developed. I ended up having another child we were still at Harvard, and my third daughter, who was the youngest, who just helped us through this little computer bug, came along shortly after I started work in Manhattan. I did that for four years, possibly maybe 4.5, and I was I didn't understand why, but I was bored. I think now back on it, I understand a lot more about it. But I was probably the only person in these United States who found venture capital boring. And the reason I found it boring, and I wanted to move on, was that you basically analyzed other people's brain power and their dreams, and you came to a decision. You had to sell the decision internally to get some money for these guys. But then you were hands off and on to the next analytical task. And when I finally got into roles where I was a doer, not an analyst, I was much, much happier. And Citibank took very good. They liked me. I was doing a good job for them. I think I still 50 some odd years later, I think I still hold the all-time return on investment record for Citicorp Venture Capital. It was a small investment, and that's why it's the record. But in terms of our return on investment, a $15,000 investment in only a year and a half became $1.5 million, and that's the kind of stuff that now Apple Computer has managed to do in the early days. They can't do it anymore, but that was the kind of thing that happened there. Anyway, Citibank gave me a portfolio of a lot of independents. They sent me to St. Louis, Missouri, where they bought a company to expand their national footprint and consumer business of any kind that they were allowed to do. And so I was flying around the country, buying consumer finance companies for 3 years for them. I was 27 years old, 27, 28. I had carte blanche to, I mean, I had the trust of the people back in New York. I negotiated those deals like I was the owner of Citibank. When I got a negotiation all settled, I got a deal on paper and a contract written, or summary of terms, I guess, first. I'd take it back to New York and present it to the president of the entire bank. I was the only 27-year-old he probably ever saw in a day's work, and it was heavy stuff. And I was successful. It worked well. And then the government regulators put me out of business. So that's a long story. I won't get into it. But anytime anybody wants to talk to me about government regulation, I'm ready and raring, because it doesn't work very well, and I have some real practical examples anyway. But I went from there. I came to California. Once again, remember I told you about the people that took an interest in me? Same thing happened. I basically had 2 job offers in California when I let it be known that I was ready to leave St. Louis, both in San Francisco, one in banking and one in the Clorox Corporation across over in Oakland. And both were active management jobs. I stuck with the banking one because I at this point learned quite a bit about consumer lending, particularly. One of the things we did at that time at Crocker was we introduced the first in the nation equity line of credit. And I'm very proud of the fact that Crocker at the time was the 5th largest bank in California, which meant that we had roughly 8 or 10% of the total number of branches, statewide branches of all the major banks. And we ran an ad in all the local papers that in 1982 or 3, I guess it was, that proclaimed Crocker Bank makes more home equity has more home equity lines outstanding than all the other banks in California combined. So I've always been competitive. and what do I remember from that time? I remember a buzzer beater from 3-point land with half a second left. That's what I remember. That was my claim to fame there. Every bank in the country now has equity lines of credit. I wish I got a 25-cent royalty on every one of them, but unfortunately, the world doesn't work that way. It was a great idea. We pushed like hell to get it out. It worked, and now everybody is very happy with it. So I did my thing for man. One small step for mankind. That's all. Very narrow little place, but.
So talk about that. So that's Crocker Bank you were on.
It was the management team that I became part of at Crocker, and this is not a widely known fact, was actually brought in by the board after the Federal Reserve Bank in Washington basically threatened them with closing the bank if they did not do a 100% turnover in the management that was here would have been in the early 70s. The bank was in for many reasons was just in terrible shape. It was not well managed. It still had some family roots with the Crocker family that weren't helping. Although I don't know much about that, so I shouldn't. I don't intend to say anything more. Just that they were not helping. Anyway, we put together once again. It was being part of a team. I was on a team with a lot of people I didn't know. That was, I think any experience you have being part of a team, and all the things that push and shove at it are, stick with you for a long time. So, most of the other members of this team, I should add, were 10 years older than I was. So I was kind of the young pup. I had, even then I had a beard, so I was not your ordinary looking banker. I got a lot of skepticism early on, but as things started to work and we started to crank out the numbers, bottom line numbers that basically allowed the bank to survive another 8 years. I was at least tolerated. But I had good working relationships with a lot of the guys, and for disparate, I'm going to have lunch this coming week with a fellow who was 10 years older than I am, and who ran the international bank at Crocker up to its final demise. Last Friday night, I went to the symphony with one of my old bosses and his wife, who are back in San Francisco now after 15-year hiatus. And they were our symphony partners back in the 70s and early 80s, and now they're back. We're back, a lot older now, but still at the same old thing, still doing our 6 times a year at the San Francisco Symphony, having fun. But the more important thing for me, I have to get this in, Bill, because I don't mean to just ramble on forever. What I did when I got to Crocker was, now I had to build a new team, because I was in at a level where I had very little competent help. And so I pretty much for the first year, I just recruited like a mad person. It wasn't easy. We didn't have the reputation of Citibank or the Bank of America. We had a turnaround story, which was at least of minor interest to the people I was trying to recruit. And over the next 12 months, I recruited 25 professionals. Mostly, my focus was on sales and marketing and merchandising experience. Relatively few of them came from the banking industry, because as our public headline said, Crocker's changing banking. We're trying to instill a sales culture in a 360 branch network that had never had a focus on sales in its history. And I needed people that understood selling and marketing and things like that more than I needed. What I told them was, look, banking is simple. I can teach you what you need to know about banking. Your skill that we need here, and it's going to be valued, is sales and marketing, because that's our job. That's what we're trying to do, is to change it. So anyway, we had a good time, wonderful crew. I'm still in contact with many of them all over. You build some wonderful friendships in an experience such as that. We lived through it together. The bank disappeared. None of us were happy about that. We had, I won't go into the details on that. I have my own opinion. It's probably not very interesting to people watching this podcast, but I had a lot of satisfaction with the job that we'd done. Let me just put it this way. And so it reinforced the things that I learned, going back to high school and college. It continued to reinforce what I'd been doing then for, at that point, 25 or 30 years. And, it had an impact. Of course, all of that stuff has an impact, not only then, but even on who I am as of this morning. It's all of that stuff builds.
So you're about to leave Crocker. So what's your mindset? What are you thinking? What's next for you?
What I was thinking was, I'm trying to be a banker. I'm pushing water uphill. The Jen I had, we went to the symphony with Friday night. He was my boss for a couple of years, and so he had to write annual performance appraisals. He wrote my all-time favorite performance appraisal, and he started it with the following sentence: Bill does not suffer fools lightly. That was true. Always has been. I speak my mind. I let the chips fall where they may. Sometimes it has not served me well. And the bottom line is, overall, I really don't care. I'd rather be 100% forthright with people. And so if I think they're an idiot, I don't hold back. I said, look, don't be an idiot. Here's where you're wrong. People don't like to hear that, according to my wife. I'm sorry. It's just the way, don't listen. People rarely listen anyway. I don't know why I keep going through this, but it's just important to me. And I'm still a garrulous, grumpy old man. I just I have my opinion on the world, what's right and what's wrong with it. And I'm happy to talk about it. Happy to, I change my mind with some regularity, not just some regularity. Let's just leave it at that. But basically, I've been on a pretty consistent track now for, since I became emergingly mature, when I was, I don't know, 16, 17 years old. And I'm not unhappy with it. I've got wonderful, wonderful friends all over the world. I've got, we've traveled a lot internationally in the last 25 years. We've made friends in every country we've gone to. Still corresponding and visiting many of them whenever we get the chance.
So what I'm saying is that where did you go to from Crocker? What did that lead you to?
Well, I wasn't, the bottom line is, I was basically terminated. The bank was heading down the chutes.
Okay.
And I was not popular with the senior management who was a big part of the problem. And I was not popular because I told them on more than one occasion that they were a big part of the problem. So I was an easy guy to jettison, very easy guy to jettison. So I was only 39 years old at the time. And now it seems like a young pup. And I wasn't very happy about it, so what was I going to do? Well, the thing that's always kept me together is I'm a project guy. And engineering is like that. When I came to San Francisco, one of the wonderful things the bank did was they helped me buy a house here on Telegraph Hill that was condemned by the city. It was an absolute disaster. It was originally built in the 1850s as a rooming house. It was falling apart in every way imaginable. And I basically scrambled all my pennies and got a 10% down payment, and the bank accepted every policy violation that it triggered, which were, there's probably a world record, the Guinness Book of Records there also. But I bought the house and I started working on it. I started while I was at Crocker. I worked nights and weekends on the place. When I found myself unemployed, I put my energies into it full time. I assembled a crew and I became a general contractor for a couple of years. There was, I don't care who you are, very, very relaxed, low guy mentally. However, if you're in a high pressure corporate environment, you've experienced stress. I mean, I had stress from the time I joined Citibank until the time I left Crocker. That was, I didn't think about it a lot. I didn't worry about it, but this, I had eczema. My skin was in terrible shape. I had a period where I had strange body odors coming from my body, even right after a shower. What the hell is that smell? That's me. What's going on? It's never properly. Nobody, I went to doctors. Nobody knew what was going on, but I'm convinced anyway, as a non-doctor, it was all stress related. It was all stress. And so after 2 years as a basically a contractor doing a lot of the work myself, and I hired 4 or 5 young guys and I basically knew a lot about what I wanted and how to do this stuff from other parts of my history, and taught them how to do finished carpentry work. We put subs for plumbing and electrical at that time, and we finished out the first floor of the building and ended up with 3 gorgeous apartments, which I rented, and which took all the financial pressure off the building. Basically paid the mortgage and the taxes from the rental income. And now I just had to figure out, okay, now I'm getting it to be 40, and what are we going to do next? My wife also had been at the bank. I met her at Crocker, and she left the bank shortly after I did. She was just frustrated with it. Being an old-fashioned banker, I said, hang around. There's going to be a parachute of some sort for you. Stick it out for another 6 months. Or she wouldn't do it. She just quit. Took the easy way out. Anyway, we were 40. We were both 40. I was done with the projects temporarily, at a resting point, financially stable. We put together, our total resources at the time was $5,000. The mortgage, as I said, I still had the mortgage, but the mortgage is being covered. I had no credit card debts, so that was good. And we put all our camping gear in a big duffel bag and did a 5-month camping trip to Europe. And we had no fixed agenda. We just said we're going to go and stay as long as the $5,000 allows us to. So we lived on about $35 a day and stayed there for 5 or 6 months. Had a wonderful time, opened our eyes to all sorts of things, looking back at where we'd been for the first, what you'd normally call the first half of your career. And decided our number one objective would be to come back, go to work for a limited period of time, and retire and travel. That was our future. So we came back. We both had great difficulty finding a job because when you showed up for an interview, people thought you were from another planet if you at 40 years old taken a gap year. And at that time, this is 1986. It was unheard of. We just looked at it as, holy crap. We're the poor slobs that had started work the Monday after the last exam, and that never had time to have our parents send us, or the money to have our parents send us to Europe for fun. So we were just taking advantage of a gap. Well, anyway, we finally both got good jobs. Diane ended up with a very solid marketing job at Charles Schwab. I ended up back on Wall Street for a couple of years. And after that, my timing was impeccable. My first day on the job was called Black Thursday. It was the day the stock market dropped 700 points and Wall Street just thought it was disappearing from the face of the earth. So the original dream was we had a dream to start a private equity firm. A guy who had been my original boss at Citicorp Venture Capital. So he was my link to that position. And we worked at it for 2 years, but the capital markets just were not in any shape to do that. And we didn't have the staying power to last any longer than that. So I came back from New York and started doing consulting for banks with my specialty of consumer lending. And that turned out, I did it for 2 or 3 years. It was very lucrative. It turned out I was worth a lot of money to people. I still, now of course it's chicken feed, but in those days, I was making serious money and banking most of it. So the downside, though, was, for one assignment I had for almost 18 months. I left San Francisco on a 6 a.m. wheels up flight out of SFO every Monday morning, flew to Minneapolis, where I stayed until Friday night and got home at time for a late dinner on Friday nights. It was pretty demanding and wearing. But of course, at the rate I was being paid, I didn't want to take any time off. It was like, okay, I could put up with this a little while longer. So I did that, and as I say, Diane was working at Schwab. We were living in the city. I was spending my weekends once again working on the house, trying to work on our space. The second floor of this building is what I call our owners unit. And when I talk about a renovation, let me speak about the house for a minute. The house is on the National Register of Historic Places. I put it there in 1978. It has historic value to San Francisco, and in fact, it had that event triggered the development of the San Francisco Telegraph Hill Historic District.
To start this, we talked about. I'm a big lessons guy, and I learned a lot of lessons from playing basketball. Just about people, tendencies, how to compete, and I'm really curious about yours. What have you learned from sports? What have you learned from basketball?
Well, I think I can sum it up in pretty simply. If basketball is a team sport, there's I don't know of any star that has been strong enough to carry the whole team. Maybe they can get by with one season, but they need a lot of help along the way. And I think the most important thing I learned from playing basketball is the importance of being able to control your ego. As I said at the beginning, I'm not a very good basketball player. I'm 6'7". I used to bill myself in the 60s. I used to bill myself as the last of the 6'7" centers. When I got to Dartmouth, there were 2 or 3 guys already 6'8". I had to hustle like hell to make the team. But anytime you're on a team, and this goes through the next 40 years of playing men's basketball, not only at clubs here in San Francisco where people get to know you, but I used to take I told you I traveled a great deal. Long before they had frequent flyer programs, I was flying 100,000 miles a year around the country. And I never went anywhere without my little bag with my Converse All Stars and my jock and my basketball, my practice stuff, my shorts and my reversible jersey. I had pickup games all over the country, and I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed being out. I enjoyed those games in one particular way. You're playing with 9 absolute strangers, people I've never seen before, and now suddenly I'm on the court with four guys on my team and 5 in opposition, and you basically have 2 or 3 times up and down the court to kind of demonstrate who you are and what you're about. Because I wasn't a great offensive threat, I always concentrated very hard on defense. I have good basketball sense. I'm a quick-witted guy. I think that probably helps if you're going to be and if you're helping out on defense. I always saw my major job as at 6'7", and at 6'7", I was still oftentimes the tallest guy on the court in men's basketball around the country. My job was to clog the paint. If the guards got beat, my job was to make sure the guy didn't get a layup. And you make that clear in the first 2 or 3 times down the court. Just they don't have to shoot. If you get a guy to turn around and go back out, pass the ball back out, it's mission accomplished. I have to admit, I also used to like the fact when those guys, they didn't know how absolutely slow I was, and that I only could, if I drove at all, it would be only to the right. And so I was always a good shooter, and I could, this was the days when the 3-point basket was just emerging. And most times, if I was playing in Cincinnati or Wheeling, West Virginia, and Houston or some odd place, when it's six, 7 guys shows up, when he goes out beyond the 3-point line, everybody leaves him all alone. Well, I drilled the first one. Now they have to play me. They didn't know I had only one move. So now my one move got me on the way to the best. Next thing you know, I've scored 2 buckets. Now I have much more presence on the court. And I still came back and hustled and played defense every time. And I think that those are the things. I don't know. I'm rambling a little bit here, Bill. I apologize, but you really need to have your ego in check, I think, to do that. That was the point. I'll come back to it. If you have 5 medium teammates and no ego, I'd much rather play on that team than to be trying to keep a superstar happy at the center of things. The other thing I have to mention is discipline. Basketball, like I'm sure other sports, basically all team sports and probably most sports, teach you the importance of personal discipline. What do they say? It's the important thing is not what you do when people are watching, it's what you do when people are not watching. And I still get up every morning, grind the beans, get the coffee started, and I go in and spend 40 minutes, which I'm not happy about. It's not fun, but I spend 40 minutes on my back doing stretching and some trunk exercises and then some embarrassingly light weights these days, just to keep any kind of tone in my deteriorating ancient muscles. But I do it every day. And before anybody else gets up, and that's something that has stuck with me now for 50 years.
I need one piece of advice from you for my USF young kids. What's the best advice you had that has helped sustain you over the years? If you could find one thing that has sustained you. Now, I was really blessed and lucky because I had an extraordinarily positive father. So I knew when I came home, yeah, you're fine. Everything's good. I just want you to come home. I don't want you worried about anything. So everything was positive, was in a positive light. That's what I got from him. So what do you say to kids, one thing that will sustain them in their career and in their life?
It's pretty straightforward. One thing is be the best you can be. Doesn't matter how good that is compared to other people. You be the best you can be. and you'd be going home and sleeping comfortably at nights and be happy with yourself. Don't set unrealistic standards. Set realistic standards for who you are and what you're going to accomplish. You know, we talked about discipline. Could I have been more disciplined during this 50-year period? Of course I could. I could have spent an extra 10 minutes a day. I could have spent an extra half an hour a day. I could have found the time if I really wanted to. So everything has limits to it. But just be the best you can be. My dad, I didn't have that kind of a dad, Bill. I loved my dad, and I know he loved me. We had more of a, I would call it a professional arrangement. We weren't lovey-dovey kind of people, either one of us. We both spoke our minds, and but I get my feedback and much of my satisfaction today from 50 years of friendships. Not only basketball players, but the people I work with, family. I have a very large and very strong family. Extended family. We just had a family reunion last year. 90 of us came together to celebrate our shared heritage. And these are the things that I hold dear, and as I look backwards, have been absolutely critical to who I am today. And I think the most important, and just to put that in perspective, I'll say it once again, I am very, very happy with who I am today. And if any kid can look at themselves 5 and 10 and 15 years out of school and say, I'm happy with who I am today, that's a win. That's a win.
Awesome. Well, Bill, thank you so much for being on. We have one thing we got to do is get you over to a Don's game.
I'm at every Don's game, and my wife is too. We were at Sunday's game, a critical, really nice win against Minnesota. No, I bleed for the Dons. It's my adopted team. The good news is the Dons and Dartmouth both share the same green and white colors.
Yes, they do.
And so I can actually wear some of my Dartmouth gear and pass for a Don's fan from a distance. But no, I love the team. I bleed with them whenever they lose. It kills me when they fall apart at some point in the game and fall behind. It's and I think it goes beyond but it goes beyond just the team too. One of the things that we both enjoy, USF has a fairly unique community in San Francisco, and we love being at the games and being able to talk with other people with an interest in they're quite knowledgeable about basketball. So we have high level basketball conversations, which I enjoy greatly. And Diane tries to keep up with, but she has enough fun doing that. And they're just the nicest people you ever want to meet. They've been, I'm a foreigner. I'm from the East Coast. I'm from another team. I've never felt anything but welcome. And we've become friends with a lot of the people. Father Paul, the president of the university, is among my people I count as a friend now. We talk basketball, but we talk other things too when we have a few quiet minutes together, and we love that time. We're having dinner tonight actually with the athletic director and his wife. We've been thankful that he showed up at the Hilltop, and just trying to do a small part to help make him feel at home here in San Francisco. So,
Yeah,
you
well,
know,
tell Larry Williams he owes me dinner.
oh, I'll, I hope he's not expecting me to pay for dinner tonight. But
Just make sure he's got it. I'm sure I have his credit card ready to go.
well, Bill, I want to thank you. This has actually been a wonderful honor. One of my Dartmouth teammates is still buried in the cold weather in Chicago. I'm going to when this gets on the line, I'm going to push it towards him and see what he has to say. He's a big he keeps me interested in Dartmouth basketball, which has been another thing that now that I've got some spare time, I'm able to. It's a little far away, but I've traveled. I've traveled to go see the team. It was disrupted a little bit by COVID, but I try to get back east once a year to watch a couple of games. And it was, I guess, 3 years ago, just before COVID hit, when both Dartmouth and USF were in different brackets, but they both played in a tournament in Belfast, Northern Ireland, which was to me it was like, the gods have spoken. I have to go to this. I have to go to this tournament. So I took a week off and for my retirement activities, I admit. But I flew to Belfast and had a wonderful time watching. I think I watched. There were 8 teams. I think I must have watched a dozen basketball games in 4 days. It was really a gym rat's heaven. Yeah.
Yeah, that was fun.
But anyway.
But Bill, thank you so much. I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to spending some more time with you.
Thank you. We'll see you up at the Hilltop Club. No problem.